Hello and welcome back to Living Soil Garden. If you're new to this channel, this is one of our regular tours. So I'm usually doing a tour once a month of the garden. We are a acre garden in Exeter, southwest of the UK, and we cultivate half an acre of garden, growing mixed vegetables on permanent beds. You'll see in a minute. We're all no dig, regenerative. So have a look at our channel, and there's lots of videos on there. There's lots of tours. Today I'm going to take you around the garden to show you what's growing on in the middle of May. Okay, so what do we have in our medium box this week? We've got some perpetual spinach, first cut, so very sweet, very tender. Then we've got the carrots from Riverford, so grown in the UK organically, but they're not coming from our garden this week. And then we've got spring onions, cavallonero, rainbow chard, our beautiful salad with edible flowers and herbs. And then we've got the potatoes again from Riverford. Then we've got wet garlic from our garden, and this is a very special type of garlic because it's still very fresh. There's no papery skin. You can use the whole lot, including the leaves. Really nice, really garlicky, but as tender as a leek. And then we've got our beautiful French breakfast radishes, and that's it, isn't it? Not bad for a medium box. And so let's get started with something new with respect to our previous tour, which is, well, first of all, let's have a look at these flowers. Let's take a minute to take in all the beauty that there is at this time of the year. Lots of beautiful flowers. That flower, yeah, has been planting together with perennials, and a lot of these are aimed at encouraging wildlife, but then there's some flowers that are here for aesthetic purposes, some that can be used for dyeing fabric, and some that are sold in salads, like this beautiful borage here. And there's some poppies there, so lots of bumblebees. You can notice it's a beautiful and busy area of the garden at this time of the year. And now let's get going to the new area that I mentioned. So this is a bed that had been covered with plastic for a while. We had squash growing here last year, but then it was a bit weedy. There was a lot of couch grass, so we now covered it. We then covered it with black plastic and suppressed the couch grass. There's still a little bit coming through, but not too much. And now we put sweet corn in a pattern together with winter squash. And there's 3 varieties of winter squash here, some dark green, some light green, like bluish, and then we've got some butternut type, which are called autumn crown. And some of you will think of the 3 sisters when you see this. Obviously here there's only 2 sisters. In this climate we find that growing the beans after the sweet corn is quite tricky, especially if you plant the beans at this stage. They can be planted later on when the sweet corn is tall enough, otherwise they tend to bring the sweet corn down, make it top heavy, and the whole thing doesn't work. So that's because the sweet corn grows a lot slower in this climate than in subtropical or warmer Mediterranean climates. While we're here, I'm going to show you the Wormery. This is a setup that many people have been asking about. It looks like a small house. It's got different trays, and each tray is treated differently. At the bottom there's a liquid box, and then as you go up there are trays with the worms and the poo, which is obviously the worm castings, and then as you go up there's more of the food, and they work their way through towards the top so that they leave behind the vermicast, which is what you want to use. And the liquid at the bottom can also be used. It's called worm leachate. It's safer not to use it on salad crops because it can contain some pathogens just because it's been sitting there for a long time, but it's a liquid that's full of fertility. And then let's have a look at the actual compost, how they're doing. So we've been turning this a couple of times, well, perhaps only once since the last video. We got given some rabbit manure from our friend Marta, and then we've got lots of grass clippings and green manures that have been mowed. This is the bit that was turned 2 weeks ago, and it went really hot. It's now still at a high temperature, but it went really hot and stayed above 60 degrees, around 70 actually, for more than 14 days. So we know that it has composted quite nicely. And at the same time, the second bay was turned into this one, which is not ready yet. It will have to mature for a few more months. Let's give it a look. So yeah, it's already composting nicely, but it's got still a little bit to go. Don't know if this is in focus at all. Yeah, here we go. Cool. So let's have a look at the garden then. Okay, I wanted to start with this bed that's behind me that you've seen in a few of our social media posts probably. And it's a demonstration bed that we use in courses, but also we harvest from. And some of you will have heard of this concept of a syntropic agroforestry, which is a system of growing that involves using 4 dimensions. So obviously not only the usual surface dimensions, width and length, but also height, in terms of getting light from different angles, sunlight from different angles, but also time. So it uses successional dynamics to make sure that fertility is built up and the conditions get ready for an abundance of produce. So this is usually a lot more common in agroforestry, and that is in growing fruit trees and other crops. And the idea is that you plant fruit trees together with service trees. So the fruit trees can be anything that grows well in your climate and produces in your climate. And the service trees in temperate climates would be willow, poplar, and things that you can prune really heavily, or even coppice, to produce biomass, but also to produce a pulse, as it's called, that drives the system to grow a lot faster. So if you cut a service tree or any other plant during its vegetative state, so when it's young and producing a lot of leaves rather than fruits and flowers, what happens is that you're pruning also the roots. The plant will self-prune the roots, and in doing so it stimulates microbiology in the soil, and that stimulates in turn the plants nearby. And that's to say, if the soil is no dig and there is a very functional biological network in the soil. So in doing so, you can essentially plant at the same time trees or plants that have got different ecological needs. So some that need a lot of fertility, like fruit trees or fruit crops in general, like tomatoes and aubergines and things like that. And also leafy crops or weedy crops, so things like a willow or a poplar or a rocket, something that is annual and that doesn't require a lot of fertility. It's a pioneer, and it's meant to prepare the ground for the following stage. If you plant all the stages at the same time and you cut the pioneer plants, the colonizing plants, the annual plants, the perennial plants that produce a lot of vegetation, you are boosting and speeding up the process of forming fertility in situ, and therefore creating an abundance phase. So that's done quite a bit in the tropics and in Italy, Portugal, Spain. In Europe at the moment it's quite popular. It was formalized by Ernst Goetsch in Brazil, but there's not a lot of talk about doing it with horticultural crops, with vegetables. Obviously vegetables are part of a syntropic system in what's called the placenta stage, the early stage. But you can incorporate this idea even if you don't have tree crops. Obviously it would be better if you had tree crops, because the whole system would be more complete. And I'm going to show you in the bed behind me, there are different types of crops that mimic that idea and could be thought of as syntropic or successional. So I'm going to turn the camera around at this bed here. So you can see that in the middle there are some fruit crops, you can call them, like something that we grow for their seeds, like broad beans. And then we've got also some bulb crops like spring onions and some fennel there. Whereas on the sides we've got crops that we keep cutting quite often, and these are perpetual spinach here on your left, and then lettuce on the right that we harvest the outer leaves off, parsley that we cut with a knife. Then we've got some rocket that it's going to flower, so that's not ideal because that will communicate some senescence to the rest of the system. So we always want everything in a vegetative state, so in a leafy growth stage. And in the middle we have a very quick crop of radish that was already harvested partially. So you can see that in this system you'd have the rocket and the spinach and the lettuce and the mustards being harvested continuously, giving a pulse to the spring onions in the middle that have been growing really fast compared to others that have grown only in a bed of spring onions on their own. And also look at the density. With this system we can grow things a lot more densely than we would if we had only a crop of spring onions in here, or a crop of rocket, or a crop of coriander or parsley or whatever. And we've got so much diversity in here. So the bed here is also humifying, creating a lot of organic matter a lot faster than you would in a monoculture bed. And that is because you have a lot of microbes doing different things and feeding off the exudates of different plants. So this is a system that you can keep going even in a vegetable garden without trees. You keep harvesting the leafy crops, and you have some fruit crops or some bulb crops in the middle, and they will be boosted by the constant pruning, by the no-dig regime, and also you can grow things a lot more densely than you would normally. Okay, so let's move on now that we're here. We got Phacelia at the back, so that's a crop, that cover crop, a green manure that is used for flowers, attracting beneficial insects, but also to suppress weeds and create biomass. And here in the middle we got also some buckwheat that's growing quite nicely at this stage, and there is some fenugreek as well, so a mix of green manures, but the Phacelia will ultimately, I think, suppress everything else. It's not really a good companion to a lot of other things, especially at this density. And behind the Phacelia there is our crop of Borlotti beans, which have been interplanted on this side with perpetual with chard, I think. So this is mostly small chard plants, and we've got this system with a rigid fencing mesh and wooden posts, and the Borlotti will grow, and we'll harvest them end of August, September, October. And on this side there's more Swiss chard. Here we got this famous interplanting that I've been mentioning in a few other videos before, and some people have asked about, which is French beans with shallots or leeks or spring onions or beetroots in the center. Here we've got shallots, and after the French beans come out we put spinach on the side, and we keep harvesting the leeks, and then we can put a green manure after the spinach on the side. So this is a continuous interplanted bed, which is quite nice. So here we have left some space in the middle for the beetroots and other spring onions to go in. Let's go on this side. At the back you can see a lot of flowers that have been planted by Flavia for different purposes. Again, we've got a lot of wildlife in here, the chives, with lots of bumblebees. Then we've got this lemon balm that can be used in teas. Valeriana officinalis, a beautiful plant, very medicinal but also beautifully attractive to insects. And then we've got lupins in here, we've got yarrow, and we've got this guy, I don't know what this plant is called, I'll ask Flavia later. A volunteer cabbage that we left in there. It's a cross between cavallonera and cabbage, we think. It's doing well, we'll see what it amounts to. Calendulas, this is another kale that flowered, more calendulas. There were a lot of narcissi, of daffodils here, a fennel plant that we let go to flower. And so that's a very rich bed. Now that we were talking about Syntropy and successional interplanting, here we got another demonstration bed with flower fruit crops in the middle. So chard is from last year, will be removed, but then we've got broccoli in here, that are a plant that wants to go to its senescent phase like a fruit tree, so it wants to produce fruits, it wants to produce flowers in this case. And then on the sides we have vegetative green leafy crops that we harvest every week. And you see, what you want to avoid is having any plant that goes really crazy to flower, because this is going to communicate to the rest of the system senescence, slow everything down, because it wants to put all the excess nutrients into those flowers and then seeds, attracting insects and so on and so forth, and so it slows down the absorption of nutrients from the other plants, and it doesn't stimulate microbes in the same way. Yeah, we've got a lot of coriander. It's already going to flower, if you can see. It's not ideal, but that's the way it is. So we know that coriander is an easy bolting crop, but we're going to harvest as much as we can, and we've got another succession going anyway. Peas for pea shoots, and these are other salad leaves. Always a bit tricky because they like heat, but we got Chenopodium, Orac, and Magenta spleen or tree spinach, which we use in our salads. Let's go here. We got, after this empty bed, we got beautiful spinach. This is true spinach, coming to an end, but not really coming to an end, but I'll show you in a second what happens to it. Towards the end of the season, well, towards the end of the spring, it starts to show some tiredness, and we get this disease that gets the leaves very quickly senescent, and then they go yellow. There's still very little of that in this crop, so we're going to harvest as much as we can. We've harvested really heavily these plants in the middle here. You can see that they are a bit smaller than the ones at the back, but they've already grown. So this time of the year the growth is so fast. And here at the back we have another green manure mix with the buckwheat and the fenugreek here that have been doing a little bit better because the Phacelia was foraged, let's say, by the slugs for a while. And then there was a big gap for a while, and I planted in some lettuce mix, and this is some extra seeds that we had that were old. And that's a suggestion for you. If you have any old seeds that you're not sure whether they'll germinate or a variety that you don't like anymore, just use it as a green manure, and you can still cut some of it if you want, but otherwise it will cover your ground, either in your flower beds or in your green manure beds. So this is a bed that we haven't touched in 10 months and more actually, and just to keep it as a demonstration until we harvest the whole lot of how many weeds we get in a bed. And there isn't much, you know. Look, there's a little bit of rosebay willow herb, and there were a bit of grasses in there, but really minimal weeds, considering that this wasn't weeded or touched at all. And a lot of things are going to flower, but there's still some lettuce to harvest in here, so we're going to come in here and finish this off and flip it in a few days. Here, this is carrots. There's very little to see at the moment. There's a lot of netting going on for carrot root fly. We've planted this 2 times because of slugs. And then we've got perpetual spinach, a marvelous crop at this time of the year. It grows so fast, we struggle to keep on top of it. We're going to sell, about 20 kilos this week, just to keep it small, keep it going without getting too big. Because what happens is, if it gets too big, it goes like a chard, like this, and then we have to cut the stalks to sell it like a spinach. This was okay, so let me show you. This one was cut 4 days ago, and it's already growing back. And I can't remember when this was cut, but definitely these guys were cut a week ago, so that would be 10 days ago, sorry. So look at this. This is where the cut happens, at that level there, and when the leaves grow, they remain, obviously the tip remains cut, but you've got tons more in the middle, and we'll let this grow to this stage and then cut, and then get the whole lot and start again. And there's several beds, so there's a lot of growing, and by the time you get back to the original bed, they've grown again. So let's go back here. So we got some cauliflowers interplanted with carrots. These are Paris market carrots, so tiny round carrots. This on the left is a perpetual spinach from last year, so same guys as these, after being cut 7 or 8 times, I can't remember now, and they have now gone to flower, so we're going to remove them, and you can experiment. Well, we've been experimenting with how to remove them efficiently. What I've done here is, the other day I mowed them with a mower and then put plastic on top to kill them. They're quite persistent because they've got big roots full of starch, so they will keep coming unless you pull out the roots, really. But mowing and topping is another solution. If it's very warm, it will usually burn them. In here we've got cauliflower with turnips, and the netting is for the turnips because they get cabbage root maggot, which is not ideal. This is another interplanted bed. Lots of lettuce actually in this one. There was the one on the right actually has got some interplanting. It's got some fennel, bulb fennel. You can see the stage it's at. Oh look, this lettuce has died, and the reason for that is usually our arch enemy, the wireworm. Let's have a look in there. Look at the beauty of this. There we go. Hopefully you can see that small guy. So that is a wireworm. So you can now hopefully see it, and this guy makes a lot of damage. These are the larvae or the click beetles, and they take many years to grow. Until then they make a lot of damage. They live on pasture, and then if you convert pasture or any type of grassy fields into vegetable production, they attack your vegetables, and they seem to really love lettuce. Okay, so we've got some beds here that were, well, this was wiped out by slugs. It was celery. We're going to plant some more soon. On this side we've got the oats and rye that were cut really low, like mowed to the ground 2 to 3 weeks ago. I'll show you a video of that while I talk. And they've now come back, and some of them have gone to flower, so the next mow will be the one that kills it. And it's beautiful. We've got a lot of biomass, a lot of root mass in the ground, because as you cut things they self-prune their roots, which is amazing. And then we're going to cut it again and kill it with very little effort. On the left hand side we've got here the peas and beetroot interplanting. Really good partnership there. You can see the beetroots on the bottom, really doing nicely, and the peas have just flowered. It will be a jungle in there. Actually, I'm going to go in here to just encourage these peas not to join each other across the path, because otherwise it becomes impossible to harvest in here. You can hear the noise. This is the peas doing the hitting my legs. Hello, little doggy. And so we've got lots of peas in here, different varieties. So I'm going to come in here and separate them. Otherwise, it's going to be, I struggle now to get through here. Let me have a look. I've got to put some string. Otherwise, they all break. Okay, here we've got the perennials. I'm not going to spend time on the perennials because I've talked about them a lot in the past. But one thing I want to show you is the successions here. These guys are flowering. This was planted 2 weeks later, still not flowering and a lot less massive. And then we got the latest succession here. These are still quite small, but it'll be interesting to see how much later they produce. Some of you on social media have seen this interplanting here through the netting. Hopefully you can see there's some broad beans on the side, and then in the middle a very quick crop of rocket, radish and turnips, and they're already well, they're ready to go. Actually, they're ready to be harvested. And again, this is the same concept. We've got 2 fruit crops on the side. I call them fruit crops. Well, let's call them abundance crops. So broad beans that produce seeds that we eat, or pods that we eat, and then in the middle we have something much quicker. And so by harvesting the middle one, when the broad beans are still small, they get enough light to grow, and then we get a double harvest from the same bed. Broad beans, this is again a late succession. They're flowering when they're still very small. We'll see what they amount to. It's difficult sometimes because broad beans can get a lot of black fly if they're grown in spring, if they're planted in spring. These guys, as you can see, have got their tips still very clean. We've had a lot of aphid problems in the tunnel, but not outside as much. So fingers crossed, this will not get black fly and we will get clean pods. A lot of lettuce here, very little to say. We've been experimenting with Salanova. We bought the plants in for the first time actually, because we didn't have any seeds of Salanova and we had a lot of slug damage, and so we thought let's just try Salanova, which is a type of lettuce that you can cut and all the leaves separate with just one cut because they're all joined in the middle there, and then you can let it grow again. But we'll see. We might do still outer leaf harvest rather than a cut and come again harvest. Lots of lettuce here. Let's come to this side before we go down. So over there we see the spring onions from last year, 1, 2 and 3. They've grown really well, and now that they're coming to an end, we'll try to sell as many as we can before we remove them. And this is an experiment that Flavia was very keen on, and it's to flip a bed gradually rather than flip the whole bed in one go. Is to flip it in thirds. So we removed all the spring onions 1 week from this area and planted some parsley, and this week we'll do the same here and then the same there. It's a bit of extra labor, but it keeps the soil covered for a longer time, so it can be effective. This is parsley planted last year in July, I think, and it's now coming to an end. It's flowering, not looking as happy as it used to. More spring onions, and you can just about see some of them are going to flower, so these won't be marketable. There's a flower there. It's different from the garlic flower, which is called Escape, and it's sellable. Don't know what the right word is there. You help me with English. And then we go there. We got the beetroots here, new season beetroots. A little bit of wood pressure on the pathways here because we didn't refresh the wood chip. Let's have a look down here. We got some broccoli with carrots down the middle. They haven't popped up yet, the carrots. It's been quite dry until recently, and the broccoli are doing really well there. Hopefully you can see through the net. Again, the net is for the carrot fly. These are beetroots from last year instead, so they were planted in July, August, and now they've gone to flower. We're going to remove them and replace them with something else. And this again is charred from last August again, which is going to come out. And in between we've got some young lettuce plants. Okay, so more lettuce, more salads, more parsley. These are the beds that were really problematic, very low fertility, high compaction. So we had to plant some green manures for a long time, and you can still see these beds have been green manured, and you can see the stalks of the rye here and some stalks of the mustard that have remained on the ground, so they're quite sluggy, these beds, and so they need constant attention. And on the right here behind the beetroots we can see the oats that had gone to flower, so what I tried and do is mow them and also crimp a little bit and see what happens. I might tarp this because it doesn't look like it's gonna die quickly enough for me to plant something else quickly. You can see the flower of the oats. This is wild oats, sorry, black oats. Beautiful plant, lots of biomass by mowing this. We don't till them in obviously because we no dig, so it's important to find good methods to get rid of them. As you saw earlier, there's that rye and oat, those two beds. They were mowed twice, and that means that they're flowering when they're quite small, which is good. Much better to mow something small. It's a bit difficult when they're too tall. Okay, there's nothing on this side anymore. I'm going to go around. Look at the willow, how much it's grown. It's quite monstrous. And this is a great example of what I was saying. So if you were to prune the willow now that it's flowering, actually a little bit earlier than its flowering stage, that would be fantastic for giving a pulse to the neighbouring plants. And so rather than compete with the neighbouring plants, like here there's rocket actually, but if there was a crop here or the Mediterranean herbs at the bottom there, it would actually give them a boost. So something that is potentially a problem, extra competition from a very hungry and thirsty tree crop, can become a resource in terms of a hormonal boost via the root system and the microbiology in the soil. Okay, let's have a look now at this. So here we got some cabbages that were attacked quite badly by cabbage root fly, and it's funny because the ones behind, they both were under net, so that wasn't the difference. The net helps, but obviously this soil had cabbage root fly, and probably those guys have got the same problem, but they are a lot healthier. These were attacked by slugs, and they had to regrow essentially from scratch because they were eaten quite badly, and so a lot of them are dying. They were already stressed, and so when the cabbage root fly attacked, the larvae attacked, and they started dying. Whereas the guys at the back, I doubt, I'm pretty sure there is some cabbage root fly larvae there as well, but they were healthy, never attacked by slugs, and so they are coping with the stress on their root system. And we get here where we have an interesting interplanting. First time we try it. We've got a lot of flea beetle damage here, but hopefully these are still going to be marketable at the end. Chinese cabbage and coriander. They're very fast crops because the coriander, as I've said earlier, tends to bolt. And so it'll be quite nice to harvest them and flip the bed all in one go. More spring onions here, very, very young. Actually, these are onions because in 3 rows per bed. So these are bulb onions started from seeds. And these are spring onions with beetroots, and we have to remove that overhanging rocket. And again, onions, a lot of wood pressure on this side. This side of the garden we used some old compost, which had some weed seeds in it, unfortunately. And the broad beans have started producing. We got some small pods, but also some big ones. And you know, this is a jungle of broad beans. We'll be harvesting a lot of pods from here. Look at those guys. Some pods are really quite big now, and some self-seeded wild rocket that was growing in this bed earlier, so it's kind of doing ground cover. And more onions, and we've been doing this thing which we find quite useful, because last year was a bit of a problem to harvest the broad beans from neighbouring beds. So if we had a whole block of broad beans, it becomes a jungle. You cannot get in between the beds, whereas growing something tall that doesn't overhang as much and doesn't grow sideways like garlic in this case, it gives us clean parts to harvest from on the sides. And we've done the same with the onions here, so there's never two beds of broad beans next to each other, so we have access without many issues. Here we've got courgettes that were transplanted in a bed that was mulched with our own compost, homemade. So obviously there are some weed seeds, but not many. And these guys, we're leaving the tree spinach because we use them in salads. And look, this compost is growing quite nicely. Look at the rooting, the roots growing already in there, probably from the courgettes. I don't see any weeds there. Might be the weeds that were here and that we removed. But anyway, there's a woody bit at the top, but then you can see the beauty of the compost underneath. It's nice and moist regardless of the weather outside. And here, sorry, I was meant to tell you about the courgettes. We've got 3 varieties of courgettes, different shades of green and different size fruits. Again, slugs have had a go, especially after the rains, but hopefully we'll salvage most of these. We've got some replacements ready to go in. Have a look at this guy there. And this I transplanted after potting them up in bigger pots with a little bit of chicken manure, so they're a lot bigger when they're going in. And this bed has been mulched with green waste compost rather than with our own. So we'll have 3 beds of courgettes. And I wanted to show you our rye that's going to flower. Look at this handsome stand of rye, really tall. So now this is difficult to mow. We'll have to do something else. I'll use a hedge trimmer to knock it down, and then we'll mow it. If you do it now, when it's gone to flower, it should die because it's an annual rye. It's a cereal rye, it's not ryegrass, so it will die. And these beds are a bit untidy because of green manures and flowering kale, and I was slowly getting to them and converting them, like this one, to spring onions. This is lettuce that's going to come out this week, more spring onions. Look at these guys. Oops, something's gone wrong here. So more spring onions. Baby kale, this is a fantastic crop. We harvest it every week. We go there and harvest the outer leaves, and it grows back like crazy. And we add it to salads, we sell it on its own. We eat a lot of it. It's such a tasty crop. You should definitely try it if you haven't yet. And these beds will be planted with rocket. And we've got mustards under this net. Then this is a boring bit because there's a lot of netting going on. Rocket here that's coming out this week. This is a way that we try to suppress the rocket rather than pull it by hand, plant by plant, because there's lots of plants in here. I mowed it really low and then we put plastic on top of it. But this is permeable plastic, breathable landscape fabric, so it doesn't do a great job, especially when it rains. Things keep growing and then push it. So we'll see. We might have to get in there and pull them by hand. Turnips and radishes here. On the left, which is a bit more interesting than... So all of those nets are essentially radish, turnips and rocket. And the nets is against flea beetle. So here, this is a chard bed with radishes growing down the middle. So you can see those guys popping up now, just germinating, and hopefully they won't get hammered by flea beetle. Doesn't seem to be so. And chard will get big relatively fast, but by then the radish will have come out, so we get an extra crop for free. And here we've got beetroots, looking really healthy. Some of them are a bit slower, but that's always the case when you've got slugs around. This is the same thing as before, just a Swiss chard, rainbow chard bed, but in the middle, rather than having radishes, we have carrots. And again, this is Paris market carrots that were planted by, it was sowed by hand rather than with a seeder, and so they're a bit patchy actually. but that's fine. They're so small that we don't need to thin them anyway. But again, slugs have had a go at these guys, unfortunately. And that brings us to an end to the outside tour of the garden. So before we go to the tunnel, some people have asked about this. We've run a course on this, and you've seen probably some posts, and that's why we got some questions. This is a bioreactor, Johnson Su bioreactor, which is essentially a fancy way of doing leaf mold, where you can put leaves in there, but also wood chip, and they decompose over a year. The pipes are for extra airflow, and the compost that comes out of here, it's amazingly rich in microbial life, especially fungal spores, and therefore it's very important that it stays cold during the composting phase and it's never turned. And so it takes a long time, and we have to add aeration with the pipes, which can be removed once this becomes quite solid and the holes stay in place without collapsing. And the pipes have been perforated on the sides as well, so there's oxygen getting in even without turning. And at the end you get a compost which is really fungally rich, which is difficult to get a fungally rich compost by turning, because obviously you break up those hyphae all the time. And so this can be used as an inoculant, as a compost, but also to make extracts and teas. And here we've got our station for liquid fertilizers. We've got garlic going on in there, garlic spray, well, liquid for sprays, sulfur sprays, because garlic is rich in sulfur, but also, oh, look at this, this is comfrey tea, let's call it tea, comfrey fertilizer should be a better name, oops. And then we got some more garlic, and there's some seaweed in there. I'm not going to show you that because it's not, well, let's go for it actually. It's just dark liquid, and this area is a bit stinky, so it's at the back of the tunnel. Let's have a look at the tunnel now before we end. So lots of changes here from last time we looked. Most of the lettuces and the spinach have come out, and we have got the tomatoes in, and some basil on the sides, as you can see. And there's different varieties of tomatoes. If you remember, well, you might see it here actually, even though these are new plants, but there were originally 2 rows of garlic and 3 rows of salad and spinach. So what we've done is removed the salads and spinach as they bolted, or as they went to flower, even though some of them are still going. So these are old season crops. And then we've got the garlic still there, and now we've interplanted the tomato plants in between the garlic. It's a bit of a fiddly job, and then we keep removing the garlic, so you see a lot of it has come out already of here, but here there's a lot of garlic still going. And quick note, you can harvest the scapes obviously of the garlic, very nice. I like to make mayo with it, but you can do whatever you want with them really. They taste like garlic and they're very tender and very mild. So we got different varieties of tomatoes, and we planted some lettuce on the side just because outside lettuce was really slow, and we had some slug attacks, so to catch up with our lettuce planting. And then this is an example again of what I was saying earlier. Cavallonero and tomato plants. So the cavallonero was here throughout the winter, and there was some spinach on the side. We removed the spinach. We removed most of the stuff that was in the middle. There were some carrots, some radishes. Well, still going some radishes there actually. But the cavallonero here remained, and so we can prune it. We can harvest it really, really heavily every week, and therefore, rather than competing with the neighbouring tomato, it's actually boosting it. And look at how this guy is doing. It's not doing bad at all, considering also how the ones down the line are. So down this row, we've got radishes instead. Unfortunately, they're bolted, so I'm going to remove them. But in between the radishes, actually you can see there's some tomato plants. And again, same idea, you remove the radishes and then the tomatoes take off. So rather than competing with each other, they are boosting each other's growth. And the basil on the side has been sprayed with lactic acid bacteria that we make here on site. Unfortunately, that seems also to attract some insects, but the idea is that it will prevent the lactic acid bacteria, the whey, will prevent downy mildew, which is a big problem on basil for us here. And then we got lots of things that have been potted up here in the propagation area. Broccoli, cabbage, squash, winter squash, the courgettes, backup courgettes in case some get eaten, more squash, spring onions, and sunflowers, and Borlotti beans. These are actually plants that are way too big to plant that. Well, actually they're good, but they need to go out now. We might sell a few this week if people want to add them to their gardens, or else we might donate them or use them in areas just to do a bit of a cover. And then we got celery here, and cucumbers ready to go in the tunnel, and they will go pardon me, they will go here in between the garlic, and more basil, cavallonero growing in a trough where there were chilies in the summer, and then now there's cavallonero, and then the chilies which were actually damaged by the wind because they were outside, but they'll recover, and then we'll replace the cavallonero with them. And I wanted to finish off to give you by giving you a quick look at this area that got a bit neglected actually. Flavia's been growing medicinal plants down there. We're going to put winter squash down here, and I wanted to show you the difference that it makes in terms of soil structure when you have a cover or not. Now there are a few weeds here because this has been uncovered for many months, but apart from that they can be easily pulled. I mean, I can even give it a go, and you can see I can easily remove a weed from here. They just germinated on the top. But look at this, same soil, just uncovered. You know, I can barely do anything with this. I can't lift it. It's like rock. And look at the cracks. Can you imagine being a plant and putting roots into that? So it really goes to show how important it is to keep your soil covered. Don't disturb it, otherwise this is what happens. If you leave it uncovered and you walk over it, compact it without any barrier, any buffer. And over there we'll be growing some more squash, but here this is not inside the fenced area, so there are some rabbits that can come in. We've seen a lot of rabbit activity, and so we'll have to put netting to avoid them eating everything. And here we got some these are oats, avena sativa, so not the black oats but proper porridge oats that Flavia is experimenting with to try and use them medicinally when they're still green like this. Probably I'll do a video later where I explain how that works.